really interesting talk for us this time. Once again, I want to thank our sponsors and, of course, everyone of you that joined the event and is watching from home. I hope you have a great time like us. And I want to mention once more that if you have any questions throughout the talk with Milica, you can type it on YouTube, and I'll be sure to transfer that onto Milica if she is not able to watch the chat as she has the talk, right? So feel free to ask any questions. And yeah, without further ado, sorry for taking some of your time, Milica, but the screen is yours. And yeah.
Thank you. Hi everyone, my name is Milica, and I will talk about the React developers in a wide world of native apps. So in this talk, I would like to go over all the challenges and share my experience in my journey, transitioning as a web developer to mobile application and transitioning from React to React Native application. So I will talk about how to get started building mobile application coming from the web. I will cover all the differences, challenges, and advantages to keep in mind when diving into the app universe. So a little bit about me. I'm a software engineer with experience working on React and React Native application. You can also find me on Twitter and Instagram as Milica. I work in a company, Badin Soft, in Serbia for almost 5 years now. It's located in a city niche with a strong tradition in technology and engineering. So in one of our projects, we needed mobile application for iOS and Android. And to write a successful native application, it needs to be accessible for both platforms and for both user iOS and Android. So however, writing the iOS and Android application, you will need different languages. So for iOS, you will use Swift or Objective-C, and for Android, you will use the Java or Kotlin. And we need to create the two separate but identical applications. So, which more often that not means having the two separate teams for each platform and for each application to develop and maintain them. So it can be increasingly difficult to keep the UI and features in sync on the both platforms. So maintain them and also to pay the two different engineering teams. So instead of having to write the same application multiple times, we can write the application all using React Native. And that means, for the most part, we don't longer require to know the Objective-C or Java to be a mobile developer. So with React Native, you will have the cross-platform application for both iOS and Android. So because of all of that and fast development we have, single code base for two applications, for both iOS and Android. And with one more advantage, and that is the usage of React and all of its benefits, including the wide community of web developers, we chose to go with React Native. So at first, starting with React Natives comes naturally for React developers because of all similarities you have. And you will still have components as building blocks. You will have the state and props work the same way as in the web. You will have and use the JSX, and you can still use your favorite state management. So that's all great, all familiar, but when you start going deeper, you can see the more differences and challenges you have to learn and overcome. So because the mobile world is completely a whole new world and a completely whole new adventure. So let's go over all the differences, challenges, and adventures to keep in mind when diving into the native app universe. So the first one is development. When you're developing in React Native, you're also developing for iOS and Android. So you have to set up and get familiar with Xcode and Android Studio. So for web development, you will only need a browser. For web, you're familiar with browser. It's just easy to open a browser and start developing and testing. But when it comes to the native development, you must always think about the platform. So both iOS and Android. And for that, you can use the Android emulators, which you can download and run from the Android Studio, or iOS simulators you can use from the Xcode. So simulators are good when it comes to testing or building an applications, but they can be wrong in some cases because simulation can only replicate the 100% of the real device. You can find your application working without any error on the simulator and having trouble with an actual device. So in these cases, Android can be trickier because there's a lot more devices you need to cover. So my advice here I can give you is to always test your application on a real device through development process, especially if you want to release on both platforms, iOS and Android. So in our projects, we have cases like our feature is working on the emulators really great, but when we open it on the emulators and simulators, we see that not everything going smoothly. So this is great advice, and you should like always test on the real device before release your applications. So when you are set up your development environment and devices and emulators, the first thing you can notice that there's no HTML tags. So names for elements you would use in React are different in React Native. So where you will use elements in React like div, section, header, now you will use the view in React Native. Use the component in React Native. So also, if you're using React the span or paragraph, you will now use the text component from React Native. Button is still a button, but you will have options to use like touchable opacity or touchable highlight, which is also a view but behaves like button. So, for example, this is the simple example of how you will display in React Native the hello world. So you will see this on screen that you have the view and text. In React, you will probably use divs and h1 tag or span. So you will import the view and the text component from React Native and use it in your application. So React Native provides a number of built-in components that are ready for use in your application. These components are like not something like really difficult to understand because like text component with React Native will translate a native iOS UI view containing the text and also translate the Android application that will result in the native text view. So next thing I want to talk about is styling. Styling on the web, you will have and use the CSS. You will have a class name that is associated with the DOM element. The CSS will target the element with the class name and assign a set of properties and values to the associated element. And for React Native, it does not use the CSS for styling. Styling in React Native is done using the JavaScript. Since React components have support for the style property, you can also create an object of style values and pass them on the component as properties. The style name works exactly the same way as in the CSS, except they're written in the camel case. So one more thing, Flexbox is still here. For example, Flexbox works the same way in the CSS with the two exceptions. The flex direction is defaulting to the column instead of the row, and the flex only supports a single number as parameter. And under the hood, the Flexbox is implemented with the view. So one thing I also want to mention, talking about styling, is the style components. For styling, you can use popular CSS and JS library, and that is style components. Style components allows you to write the actual CSS code to style your components. And one of the benefits of using style components is that you will have the CSS syntax out of the box, you will have dynamic styling, and you will have theming. So with style components, you can also support more complex styles like transform, which is really great. And if you're familiar with style components and you have used it on the web before, my advice is to go for it because you're familiar. It would be really easy to style in the React Native application as well. So the next big difference I want to talk about is navigation. In the browser world, you will have the URL. So you will have the current page, a back button for a history, and if you're using React, you're probably using React Router to handle the change and go to the new pages. So if you're using React Native, there are still support for React Router, but there's two more libraries you can check out, and that's React Navigation and React Native Navigation. So in the mobile world, you will have screens instead of pages, and between them follow several well-understood patterns you will use to navigate between those screens, like tab navigation, stack navigation, and backstack navigation. And navigation works like you're having different decks of cards, where cards are screened. So you will define different decks of screens for each purpose. This is because a user could add or go back to a previous screen. And it is important to note that on the native, you start from the first screen defined in your deck, and when you add a screen, it goes back to the top of your deck. So when you go back, it goes off the top of the deck as well. And this means that the first screen is loaded in the background till you dismiss the stack or go back. So next thing you will face is the platform-specific code. So unlike React, React Native addresses the need to write the different code for different platforms and build applications that follow the platform-specific UI and UX guidelines. And this is like case you will face in your applications. We had a request to write some components that is different from the platform, and React Native offers two alternative ways to build the cross-platform application more efficiently. The first one is the platform module. So React Native provides a module called platform to detect which platform or which version of platform, if you're developing for Android, the app is currently running. So it's especially useful when you're using components that contain only smart parts of the platform-specific code. So you will import the platform from React Native, and then you will set some condition to check what platform you want to develop your feature. So the second way is the platform-specific extensions. So React Native will load the matching files for a specific platform by automatically detecting whether the file you're working on has .iOS or .android extensions. And in this way, you can be sure that each time you're coding for iOS and Android, React Native will always import the correct required component. And this is really great and really nice support to have. And the next thing I want to talk about is the React Native application state. So this is one more thing you don't have to worry about on the web, and that is important to take about when you're working on mobile application. So the app state user can have the application in the background or have it in the foreground. And this is very important because you don't want the user putting your application in the background, and when it comes back to show something, you want to update the state or change the screen. So user can go back and forth in your application, and that is very common, and you must always think around it. So in React Native, you can use the app state from React Native, so it can tell you if your application is in the foreground or the background, and notify you when your state change. So we have three states: the active state, which tells us that the application is running in the foreground. We have the background state, which tells us that the application is running in the background. The user is either in another application or on the home screen. And you have the inactive state, when that state occurs when transitioning between foreground and background, and during periods of inactivity, such as entering the multitasking view or event or some incoming call. So yes, this is really important, and you can use these three states to know when your application goes back and foreground and background. The next thing I want to talk about is the native features. There are many native features mobile has to offer, like push notification on camera, And on the web, too many of those are not used so often. But when building an application, you must think of when you want to ask permissions for those or how to handle those permissions for future use of your application. Example, when you're asking for permissions for the camera in order to update their profile picture, you need to have the check every time since user may have not proceeded to give you permission for that. And the next thing is network. And when you're talking about mobile devices, your connections may be slow, unreliable, or non-existent. So you must build your software to support these cases. So beginning with some connectivity prompts and including the offline methods, maybe like caching. So be prepared for possibility of the connections breaking in the middle of the network activity. And it's great for the user experience that you show some sort of icon like and text that device is offline and try again that there's no network connections. So for that, I have one advice or recommendation you can check, and that is the NetInfo package that provides information about the user active network connections and connectivity status of their mobile devices. It also identifies the user's current network type, such as Wi-Fi or mobile networks. So we use it in our application, like especially to check if there's Wi-Fi connections. So this is really great. And if you have these cases, you can check out this package. It's really great. Next thing I will talk about is sharing code. So if you're building both web and mobile application, you can leverage on some of the code you use. Converting a React Native application to React, you can use the React Native web to bring a mobile application to the browser. But it will require some significant modifications as well as some adjustment in the user interface. So you can share the logics between mobile and web and other ways to make your components independently for each platform and only share the logic. So sharing a code base is not really simple. It goes beyond simple and using code. So both React and React Native like process get really complex, and sometimes you must think it's better for you to develop separately, or you can use the sharing code and try with that. So when we're talking about sharing code, I have to mention the Monorepo. Monorepo allows you to have the multiple projects and share common dependency instead of installing the dependency for each of them. They also simplify sharing code between your projects, allowing you to import code from one package to another. And as an example, you may want to have a monorepo containing a website, a mobile application, and some shared code that you wrote. And one of the most popular options for that is the Yarn workspaces. So when we are talking about monorepos, I have to mention Lorna. Lorna is a really great tool for managing the JavaScript project with multiple packages. We have tried it in our projects and it was really great. So if you have the situation to work with multiple packages with your projects, you should check out the Lorna. And also one thing about the React and React Native is testing. So all developers make mistakes, and testing is really important because it helps you to uncover those mistakes and to check if your code is working. And this is like really important, especially if your release is getting closer, to have your test and not worry that your application will break. So the default template of React Native ships with Jest testing framework. So you can use Jest to write your test in React Native. So if you're a React developer, you'll probably use Jest, and this is the same. So you will not have the difference here. And for the libraries you can use the React test renderer to develop and provides a React renderer that can be used to render React components to pure JavaScript objects. And other library is React Native Testing Library. It builds on the top of the React test renderer and adds current event and query APIs. So both of these libraries are really great. and you should check out what for you the most and choose that one. So next thing I want to talk about is debugging. For debugging, you can use the Chrome developer tools. So if you're debugging in Chrome as a web developer, that's like the same. But I want to mention something that is really great for debugging React Native application, and that is Flipper. Flipper is extensible mobile application debugger, and that is a platform for debugging the iOS, Android, and React Native application. It can help you to visualize, inspect, and control your application from a simple desktop interface. That is tooling is I strongly recommend you to check out and use for debugging as a mobile developer. And with Flipper, you will also inherit the plugin ecosystem that exists in the native Android and iOS applications. So this means that you will be able to use the plugins for React Native as well. So these plugins are device logs, device crash reports, and inspecting network requests, which was really helpful in our projects, like inspecting the device preferences, cached images, native layout elements that can also help you in your application. So one of the most big differences coming from the web to mobile is deployment. And the React Native deployment on the React Native side, you have to use the native way to deploy your application. And you must remember that React Native is only a native application. So you have to build and upload your build for iOS and App Store, for Google to Google Play Store, and for Huawei to App Gallery. And after your build is uploaded, for example, in Apple, we'll run some automated tests on your application for basic info provided and check if everything is looking okay. And after this is okay, you could test your application with other developers through a program Apple provides called TestFlight. And TestFlight has a really great pet testing program, so which is really great. And it's very important to know that each deployment will need to pass some validation from Apple. That will take some days in order for our release to be available to the end user when the testing phase is over. And for Google, you will use the Google Play Console to publish your applications and games with the Google Play Console. So one more thing I want to mention here is the code push. Code Push is the part of the App Center. Code Push is the App Center cloud service that React Native developers use to deploy mobile applications directly to the user devices. And this is a really great way when you have like some bug and your testing needs you to check changes. And you don't need to go to the build process as well. You can use the code push to push it directly to the tester devices and to check if everything is now working really great. So that will be all. Thank you so much. I hope that my talk will help people moving from the web to the mobile world. And I think that I will have help with my tips and experience and to make other people transition like easier for them. So you can find me on Instagram and Twitter as Milica, and that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Milica. Very, very helpful indeed. And yeah, for the rest of you guys that are up for the next talk, we will be seeing you in about 15-ish minutes. The next talk is with Colby, and if there's anything, of course, feel free to reach out to Milica. She mentioned here social links, so be sure to find her there. And for any questions, of course, reach out to her directly there, or here on YouTube, and we'll be sure to forward it to her. So again, thanks for watching, and for sure we'll be seeing each other in about 15-ish minutes. Thank you, Milica, for having the great talk with us, and yeah, that's all for now.
Thank you. Bye.